Thank you very much, Brendan, and indeed I'm delighted to be talking about Clogh Oughter to you today. I was excavating there for 6 weeks in 1987, and it was an amazing place to excavate. You know, it was just so exciting, and the finds we got were something extraordinary. And then when I could weave the finds into the story of Clogh Oughter in the 17th century, that sort of brought it to life. And the first-hand accounts of people who were held in prison there, etc., is all part of that story, which is amazing. Also, there's what archaeology can bring to history, and the extra information we can learn through archaeology of things that aren't fully recorded in the historical record. So first of all, the location. Local people here will know very much where it is. It's some miles west of Cavan town here, in the middle of part of Clogh Oughter. You can see it here on this one. And it's a very strategic spot. And we think it was a crannog, the crannog of the O'Reilly family, before the de Lacys built a castle there in the 1220s. So this is a Norman castle, probably built by William Gorham de Lacy, who was a son of the original Hugh de Lacy, and his mother was a daughter of the last High King of Ireland, Rory O'Connor. And he built this castle, we think, in the 1220s. But it's a strategic spot because all the waters of the Erne system flow through Rand Point there. So any riverine traffic going up and down had to pass that point. So that's an important feature about it. The de Lacys get thrown out very early in the 1230s or so, and it is in contention between the O'Reillys and their overlords for a lot of the medieval period, the O'Rourkes, throughout the rest of the medieval period. And when I was looking at the history again, in 1600, 1601, in the State Papers, it says that a Catherine Butler was the warden of Clogh Oughter Castle. And this sounded very strange, and it took a bit of working out to work out who she was exactly. She was married to Mulmurray O'Reilly, who was the son of Sir John O'Reilly, and she was a daughter of Walter of the Rosaries, who was the 11th Earl of Ormond, from Kilcash, County Tipperary. My father came from Kilcash, so it was an interesting connection for me. And her husband, Mulmurray O'Reilly, was killed at the Battle of the Yellow Ford, fighting on the English side. And so she was sort of the person in charge at the time of his lands, etc. So moving on there, then we come to the plantation of Ulster, and we heard quite a lot about the plantation this morning. From 1607, after the flight of the Earls, they were planning the plantation, and they threw Cavan in with the other counties. Probably shouldn't have been, but anyway, that's what happened. And they decided they had an army man, Hugh Cullum, as the constable of the castle, and he spent a certain amount of money on it at that stage to keep it standing, the roof or whatever. And they allocated 6 townlands for the support of it as well. And then there's a quote in 1620, and I just read it out. Clogh Oughter in County Cavan, Captain Hugh Cullum holds this castle and the island and certain lands. By his lease he is tied to reparation, repairing them, I suppose. This fort was made choice of for keeping priests, so it was to be made into a prison. And £200 sterling allowed for reparation and fitting the lodging there, which money is disbursed and the place ready to be employed. So as it happened, it was never employed. The place just sat there for the next 20, 30 years or so until the 1641 rebellion. And then in 1625, Hugh Cullum was granted the castle and those lands, those 6 town lands, outright. He was made, became Sir Hugh Cullum eventually, and he died in 1630 and was succeeded by his son Arthur, who comes into the story then of Clogh Oughter later on. So what did they rebuild as part of that, creating it into a prison? You can see here a section of the castle, and where we could work out the floors were from this period just before 1620, when they'd spent this £200 sterling on it. And you get an impression there's 5 floors in it altogether. This is a map from the period, and you can see Clogh Oughter shown there in the middle of Lough Oughter. Things that were added were they added those floors which hadn't been there before. There was only 1 floor in it actually originally. They added a spine wall with fireplaces that's up the middle and a chimney at the top. A new ground floor doorway, because your medieval castle had a first floor doorway, which would have needed a wooden stairs outside to get up to it. But this had a new ground floor doorway with an iron grille or yett on it. And they demolished the old stair turret that was there, so they would have needed timber stairs within in this refurbishment of it. And this is a reconstruction drawing then of it by my brother Phelim. And you can see some of those features, the ground floor doorway there with this iron grille on the outside. There's the first floor doorway blocked up with a little window put in. You can see the roof and chimney up at the top. And it was described at the time by Clogh in the mid-17th century, and I quote, "There was of old a little island about it, but it was all worn away to the base, the bare stone walls, and not a foot of ground was to be seen, only a tall round tower like a pigeon house, standing in the midst of the waters, and above a musket shot from it to each shore." So, so this is what survived. This is after conservation and after the excavation. And you can see there that the big beam holes for that 13th century floor, original floor, there. And that was the only floor in it. So you just had 2 floors originally and probably a much lower roof within this tall tower. And this is quite a common feature of 13th century castles. You can see it here from another angle. You can also see the remains of that spine wall in here with a fireplace, comes into the story too. And the foundation of it was a timber beam which had rotted out, so that's how you have those voids sort of partly under the wall there. And what you're seeing there, this big damage to the wall, was after the siege in 1653. They put a huge charge of gunpowder into it and blew out this entire wall. People say at the moment that this damage was caused by the bombardment, but those walls were 2.5 metres thick. The cannonballs were bouncing off it. You know, I found loads of broken cannonballs there. It couldn't have done that damage. So, moving on. 2 important people in the story, of course, are shown here. Bishop William, I always say Bedell, but Beadle is probably the correct pronunciation. But anyway, I'm in such a habit now of saying Bedell. You can see him here up on top right, mentioned already today. And then his dean at Kilmore, Henry Jones, quite a famous character too, involved in the story. He wrote an account of the initial rebellion here in Cavan and published it in 1642 in London. And this is the title page of it. And indeed, Brendan edited a new edition of it quite recently. I don't know if it's still in print, is it, Brendan? Possibly, yeah. A very nice little edition, well worth seeing. He later became Bishop of Meath. He was Cromwell's Scoutmaster General in Ireland for a while. And as Bishop of Meath, he did a very good thing in that he presented the Book of Kells and the Book of Durrow to Trinity College, and they mightn't have survived otherwise. Up above then, William Bedell, he organised the translation of the Old Testament into Irish, and the original manuscript survives in Marsh's Library in Dublin. It wasn't actually printed till the 1680s, and there's a copy of that there shown. So, October 1641, the very, very start of the rebellion, Miles O'Reilly, who was the sheriff of the county, arrived at Arthur Cullum's door at Clogh Oughter. And I should explain that Clogh Oughter, that wasn't the castle. On the shore of the lake, there was a house built by the Cullums. It must have been quite a fine house. And that's where they were living. Nobody was living out in the castle. And anyway, the Arthur Cullum wrote a deposition, and he says that Arthur Cullum, Esquire of Clogh Oughter in the county Cavan, deposed that on Saturday, 23rd of October last, between the hours of 7 and 8 in the morning, he heard something about the rebellion starting. And then later, the High Sheriff of that county, Mulmore MacEdmund Riley, that's Miles O'Reilly, with divers of his company, knocked at the deponent's door and required entrance and conference with this deponent, and for the speedy advancement he had for some service to his majesty. This deponent, nothing suspecting him, opened his doors, and immediately there rushed in divers men with skeans, swords, pistols, and pikes, and told this deponent that he must yield himself and his arms and ammunition. And then they demanded the key of the castle of Clogh Oughter, which was a strong tower situated in the midst of the loch, some musket shot from the deponent's house. So, moving on then, they told me immediately they told me that I must forthwith be carried to that uninhabited and comfortless castle of Clogh Oughter, there to remain with a strong guard till they had subdued the whole kingdom. So, a nice part of the story too is that the man who was put in charge of the castle was quite humane. One Owen MacTurlough Riley was left captain or chief commander of the guard, who for aught that ever I could perceive was a mighty civil man, much troubled at these distempers, and under God, during my imprisonment, which was for 6 months, a continual preserver of his life, of my life, of Cullum's life. So he gives his story there. Clogh, who was a stepson-in-law of Bishop Bedell, he gives a slightly different version of it and sort of blames Cullum for not having more ammunition, etc. And he says, Mr. Arthur Cullum, whose father, Sir Hugh, being a captain under the Queen in Tyrone's wars, had that fort committed to his trust, for the keeping of which he had a large proportion of lands given to him. But his son, who knew nothing of the wars of the Lord, neglected the place so much, where the magazine ought to have been kept for the defence of the country against sudden insurrections, that though he said he had in his house when he was taken prisoner 10 pounds worth of sugar and plums, yet he had not 1 pound of powder, nor one fixed musket for the defence of it. There's great description of that. You can see this man was a clergyman. You can see his ability to give a sermon. Initially in the rebellion, Bedell was left in peace in his house at Kilmore Cathedral. But then, as things progressed, the rebels took over the whole of the county, really, but there were 2 castles of the settlers, the Scots, Keela and Croghan, that were holding out, and they were being besieged by the O'Reillys and O'Rourkes, and during that they must have sallied out and captured some of the important O'Rourkes, and they needed to be able to bargain with them. So they decided to place Bedell, his 2 sons, and this fellow Clogh, a stepson-in-law, in Clogh Oughter Castle in prison. And they held them over Christmas, 1641, for 3 weeks. And eventually there was an exchange of prisoners and they got out. And it was a comfortless place to be kept. And some people say that Bedell died as a result of that. It mightn't have helped his continuance of life, but he was about nearly 70 years of age, which at the time was pretty good going. But what happened was when he got out, he was taken in by Dennis Sheridan, who was a Protestant minister, but he was of one of the local families and he was allowed to stay where he was. But there were a lot of refugees coming to the house as well. They seem to have brought fever, and that's maybe what killed Bedell. So he died soon after that. In describing the castle then, in one place they say, where no man had lodged in 40 years before, they were on the first floor. You saw those floors a while back. And they were brought, meat and bread and stuff was brought to them, but they had to do their own cooking. And in a cooking pot on the fire, that's mentioned. I found the remains of a couple of pots actually, so could have been one of the ones that were used. And then this man was held with him, a man called Castledine, who was living at Farnham. And he had been a carpenter, and he was able to make shutters for the windows to keep out the worst of the wind, I suppose, and help their comfort there. And then at one stage there's an interesting account again. The siege of Drogheda. This was not the well-known siege of Drogheda by Cromwell, which is later, of course. This was a siege by the 1641 rebels against, I suppose they were probably loyalists mainly, that were royalists in Drogheda. And I'll read out the bit here about it. And this was William Bedell Jr. And of the people who were held with Bedell there were his 2 sons, his stepson-in-law, Castledine and Cullum. Every single one of them left an account of it. Some of it was lives of Bedell, some of it were depositions. But William Bedell Jr. Wrote this bit. But it happened that in the castle where the bishop was prisoner, one night a soldier newly arrived from Drogheda was entertained by some of the guards who kept their court in the lowest room. So that was down here. You can see that fireplace that actually survives. In the night, late, some of the guard questioned the soldier what news there was from Drogheda. One of the English prisoners that understood Irish, being just over their heads, laid his ear to a clift in the plancher. I think it must be a crack in the boards, and listened to their discourse. The soldier told them plainly that the siege was broken up, and showed them his own hands and arms all scratched and rent and torn with briars, while he was in a hasty retreat from an assault they had made upon the city. He told them also that the bullets poured down as thick from the walls as if one should take a fire pan full of coals and pour them down upon the hearth, which he acted out before them, sitting all together at the fire. And for his own part, he said he would be hanged before he would go forth again on such a piece of service. He that listened soon communicated his news to his fellow prisoners, whereby it pleased God to revive their spirits not a little. But they were fain with all diligence to keep the matter to themselves. So you get this really human story, and here the prisoner is just above, and the man listening through the crack in the floor there. When they all got out, maybe Colm was sort of 6 months after he was initially imprisoned there, and most of them got to Dublin. So it wasn't all a bad story in that way. Arthur Colm himself joined the Cromwellian army, and he was killed at the siege of Clonmel. So, moving on then, we have a picture of Rinuccini here, but the actual man who visited Clogh Oughter was Rinuccini's right-hand man, mentioned this morning, Dionysius Massari, the Dean of Fermo. And he came up to talk to Eoghan Rua in 1646. And after the Battle of Ben Burb, quite a prominent individual was captured. He was Lord Montgomery of Ards, and he was imprisoned here in Clogh Oughter Castle. And Massari came to visit him and wrote an account of it. Massari at the time was staying in Colm's house on the shore, so he got a boat across to the castle and was allowed to visit Montgomery. And he describes it. On my arrival, I found him in a room almost at the top of the tower. So you can see, we show him up here. Those sets of steps, I'd imagine, going between the floors. With two other colonels, prisoners. He came to the door to meet me, and with a profound bow said jokingly that the constable was the cause of his not having advanced further to meet me, but that I must pardon him. He spoke in Italian, welcoming me as well as he could in that language. I replied that I should prefer to find his lordship in other circumstances. The first time it was my good fortune to see him, but since God had so ordained, I was there to place my services entirely at his disposal, out of regard for his great merit, valour and nobility. He warmly thanked me and remarked that such were the fortunes of war, and requested us all to be seated. He then talked for a while on various topics, and especially on the charms of Italy, concerning which he displayed an amount of information that led me to think that he had actually seen and enjoyed these, but he added that he had never been there. Eventually, I took my leave of him, and as I was departing, he made me a present of a watch of elaborate contrivance, which indicated the hours, the days, the month, and the phases of the moon, and which he pressed on me with much courtesy. After some protests, I took it and thanked him. I asked him to grant me one favour without, however, expressing what it was, and when he had at once replied, he was my servant and would do whatever I might command. I requested him to agree to this arrangement, that whilst the ownership of this beautiful present belonged to me, he would oblige me by having the use of it until such time as he was free, since it was not right that in addition to the troubles and inconveniences of prison life, he should also be deprived of the knowledge of the hours and thus be unable to make a satisfactory distribution of the short time I hoped he would be detained in the tower. He laughed at this, showing that he appreciated the polite fiction and the kindness with which I expressed it, and in deference to my wishes, he consented to take back the watch. Parting from him in the same position in which he was when I entered, I descended to the bottom of the tower and then took boat back to my lodgings. He was swapped, there was an exchange of prisoners again in 1648, but he seemed to have spent over a year, certainly maybe a year and a half, as a prisoner in the tower there. So Eoghan Rua then is the next individual, and we heard this morning and last night for people who were there how he was very ill on his journey in 1649 coming down to Cavan. It was described that he was in a horse litter or something, something almost like a stretcher or something. He was being brought along. And it's my conviction, of course, that it was the house on the shore, which was also called Clogh Oughter, the Column House, where he died eventually, rather than out of the castle, which would have been pretty comfortless. And there wasn't any great threat in the immediate area at that stage. The 1st of November, he wrote to Ormond, I think it was, and described and said that he was on his deathbed without any hope of recovery. Around him, when he died, he had his physician O'Shiel, the Archbishop of Armagh, the Bishop of Kilmore, his son Henry, and others, I think. And just showing there now, the house on the shore was here in Inishconnell, and in the next slide I'll say a bit more about that. Nothing to be seen on the ground there anymore. And I just put this picture here, it's Lochscore in Leitrim, and there's sort of a similar looking arrangement between a house built by the Reynolds, I think, MacRynell family, and also there's an island with a castle, but I think it's a later one in that case, just to give you some idea of what the castle might have looked like. So, as part of the research on all this, I got a geophysical survey done of this field, and we did find the footprint, I suppose, of the house, and it's there. And these yellow bits are, I think, where there was likely to be fires affecting the ground. So probably fireplaces, maybe the kitchen, etc., as part of that house. But it would take excavation to really find out the shape of the house properly. The first edition of the Ordnance Survey map, it is marked as buildings, ruins of buildings connected with Clogh Oughter Castle. So I think that's where Eoghan Rua died. So moving on then to the siege of the castle. Just before that, the Archbishop of Armagh spent time, I think, living in the house there as well in 1650, 1651, and held a meeting of bishops of the province of Armagh there. By 1653, parts of the Ulster Army were the only soldiers holding out against the Cromwellians still, and this was their main strong point that was left. And the only short account we have of the siege is a letter from a Colonel J. Jones. He's not related to the other Joneses, to Major Scott, from the 1st of March 1652, which actually would be 1653. This day we have intelligence from Colonel Barrow that Trinity Island in the county of Cavan and some other island thereabouts are delivered up unto him, and that he is now before Clogh Oughter castle, and hath by a fiery float burnt their boats or cots, as he hopes, and with slugs hath burnt their corn, and hopes in a short time it will be rendered or quitted. This is their most confiding garrison in Ulster. God hath brought them very low, both in spirit and number, in the north. So that's about all we have about the siege of the castle in historical sources. We have the terms of the surrender as well between Colonel Theophilus Jones, who was a brother of Henry Jones, and Philip MacHugh O'Reilly from April 1653. But from local tradition, and we know that there's a road here called Cromwell's Road, and the tradition was that it was built or improved to bring heavy cannon up to, and there was Camp Hill here marked on the first edition also. And Damien Shields, who looked at the military equipment that I found on the excavation, he drew this map indicating where they may have set up their cannon to attack the castle. And we did find evidence of this. There was broken cannonballs. There was a little bit against the wall at one point where you could see a few cannonball strikes on the wall. I'll show those in a minute. The slighting of the castle then was done subsequently. We also, in some underwater research near the castle, worked out that they did try and storm it at some stage, and just the evidence of where the bullets were found, etc., indicated that. So how long the siege went on, we're not too sure, but we did find some burials in the excavation, and they seem to make sense as people who casualties during the siege, who would have been buried at night time, I presume. And there's 4 skeletons there. One was in quite a formal coffin. We had the nails that held the coffin together showing up, but it was hard to see from any of the skeletons what exactly they died of. Some of the finds then, and I mentioned the cannonball strikes on the wall. You can see here, the wall, as I said before, is 2.5 metres thick. So the cannonballs are really hopping off it. I think there was another small one around there somewhere. We got many broken pieces of cannonball there on the ground. We got also bits of mortars, which were bombs. And in an earlier thing there, you'd see the sort of mortar that would have sent these bombs towards the castle. And I think that may be the slugs he mentioned that set fire to their corn, which might have been in stacks close to the castle. We also got bits of different, bit of a musket barrel here, possibly a bit of a trigger there, a bit of a smaller pistol. And then this bit of a musket was found by Lord Farnham. He did some digging there in the middle of the 19th century, and that's in the National Museum now. He found some swivel guns as well, but they can't be found anymore. So talking about the ecclesiastical connection and the the Archbishop of Armagh being there, you have part of a papal seal of Clement. Might have been Clement VIII, who was 1592 to 1605. Interesting here is that we got 2 harp pegs, indicating a harp on the island at some stage. It's the same buckle, just 2 different shots, and a pestle there. Got some very fine spurs. I mean, it indicates people of high standing there. This is a decorated bronze spur. Another one, iron with silver inlay. Which is very fancy, I think. Charles I had spurs a bit like that. An earlier, probably 15th century, bit of a cheek piece for a horse and a currycomb here. And again, indicating people of high status here, we got some gold and silver lace. And this is the sort of stuff that there's an Earl of Kildare and one of the McCarthys with sashes and gloves, etc., with this sort of very fancy material, evidence for, again, high status people around the site. And these are interesting pieces. Mounts from a book that we got, and part of the clasp for a book. And the cover of the Book of Lecan in the National Museum has almost the exact same corner mounts here, and would have had a similar clasp to that one. So the castle then becomes a picturesque ruin on the Farnham estate, and you can appreciate here the explosion that was used after the Cromwellians won the castle. They must have put a huge charge of gunpowder. It was the very end of the war. They must have had plenty of gunpowder to use. Put it in the base of the wall and blew out this whole 1/3 of the castle, and you can see the big chunks of masonry there, some of which are still there. And we found evidence of this at the base in that the last few courses of the stone were sort of driven out. So there's no doubt about that. It's not mentioned anywhere in the historical sources, but we have the evidence for it. So the book, after a number of years, came out anyhow in 2013, and we launched it at the Cavan County Museum, Ballyjamesduff, in 2014. And just like to say, if you'd like to know more about it, everything is to do with Clogh Oughter is in that book until more is discovered in some way. So with that, I'd like to finish up, and thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Con. I would just say myself, I mean, that was brilliant. I recall one of the kind of highlights of my time being interested in history was, remember Con around 2010 or 11 rang me and said, we're doing this geophys at Clogh Oughter, would you like to come out and have a look? And so I met with him. I don't know if you remember this, but we met anyway. It was just after the very bad snow and a couple of bad winters. The lake was frozen and that. And they were doing the geophys on that field that day. And I remember it was the geophys person, it was a lady, came down and you said, we found the house, and said, yeah, it's just there. And I just thought, oh my God, it hadn't been seen in how long, it's underground, the remains of it, and it had just been found just when I sort of wandered in onto the picture. So it was a great thrill for me to have been there that day, and I always appreciated that. But if anyone has a question or two, we have time for or any points or anything.
Colin, thanks a million, it was great. I'm curious about the medieval castle and the flooring, because when you mentioned about when the work is done and they put in 5 floors, but before that there'd just been one.
Yeah.
What was the purpose of that, of a single floor, and then walls that went, seemingly on forever beyond that. I mean, was that a sort of a typical kind of design?
It's a bit unusual. As they built it originally, it seemed to be built in 2 stages. We just don't know exactly how much. The first 2 floors were built first, and they didn't have, they must have had a wooden floor or wooden stairs connecting the 2. And that would have had a low roof of some sort. But they liked it be imposing, and they built, quite a lot of castles were built much higher than the roof, which is strange, or sometimes the roof was just down a little bit within it. And there was an attached stair tower, and that only went from first floor level. Their door was at first floor level, so you'd only really one decent round room in it, and you must have had a basement underneath. But you could go out another door at that level into the turret and go right up to the battlements, and you could defend the battlements from there. But that was all you had, so it's a very strange use of space, But it's fairly common that you have these countersunk roofs, But we didn't get the evidence for it, but there's evidence for it in a lot of other places like Maynooth, etc., where you can see channels to let the water out at a particular level where the original roof was. But they added in Maynooth, a big roof much higher up later on. So.
John? I'm sorry, that beat you. Sorry, John.
I have 2 questions. Where did the story come from so that Eoghan Rua was poisoned? Because we now know from history that he was well, and he pulled or something, so where did that come from? The second thing, in spite of Cromwell's army spending so much time building roads into a castle that was undefended, technically. There was nobody there, was there? There was no army defending it.
Oh, there was, yeah. There were, at that stage, they were defending it, because the 1641, they took it over, the O'Reillys. So they were defending it all right. Philip MacHugh O'Reilly might have been there in person, directing things during the siege, etc. He certainly signed the terms of surrender and all that. So, they were there at that stage. It was the last strong point of the Ulster army, to capitulate.
Well, in a way, it might have been defended, but here was a castle sitting in the middle of the lake. The good do is stay by it.
Yeah, I suppose they wanted to map up, and there were elements of the army around as well that he controlled, so the terms of capitulation mention another, smaller outposts or whatever. They got fairly good terms and conditions. They were allowed to leave Ireland within 6 months, join up with Spain, etc. And about 2,000 or a big number anyhow, I don't remember, did end up going to Corunna. I think it caused quite a bit of trouble in Corunna when a load of people arrived and they didn't know what to do with them. But Philip MacHugh O'Reilly ended up then in the Netherlands, where he, one of Colgan's little books is dedicated to him. And he never got back to Ireland or anything anymore. But he had quite big estates in Cavan.
What about the idea of being poisoned?
Oh yeah, I don't know where that came from. It's probably, your great hero and leader gets ill all of a sudden. Someone thinks that, something about a boot he got from Coot or something. But
Siege of Derry,
yeah,
it's nonsense.
It's folklore sort of, and it's hard to know how much credence you can put in most of these.
Correct the record, giving capital bad names.
Sorry, Peter.
I was just to know, is the island unique is the castle unique in being on an island in Ireland? Are there any other examples of that?
Of that period, there's very few. There is one in but it's rectangular in Lough Corrib. Is it the Hens Castle or something like that? Castlán na Kirker. And that's on a very small island as well. But it's a pretty unique castle in lots of ways. I mean, there are circular towers like that in different places. Nina,
And just one supplementary on the house belonging to Cullen that he occupied. Is that delineated? Could someone go out and look at it?
No, not on the ground or anything.
It hasn't been.
You would have to do an excavation. That's the next thing.
Could you walk to it and look at it? Or is it
No, you can't see anything. It's just
can't see nothing?
flat field. Yeah.
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 You know, all around we have all these castles, most of them now in decay. And I had a knock on and said, what do you think we should do to preserve these? Because over the years the country has fallen down. And nothing to do to preserve these buildings.
Clogh Oughter is a national monument. There was in connection, when I was excavating there, it was to facilitate the conservation of it. And we'll see tomorrow what state it is in now, but I'm hoping it's not too bad. But the good news for you is that there is a new fund that the National Monument Service run for a community monument fund, and especially for buildings that are not in private ownership, but I'm not sure, it may even be possible with other buildings. You can apply for money to conserve it, and it all has to be done properly. You have to do a conservation plan, you have to employ conservation architects, etc., and do it all the proper way. But there is money there now that can be used for saving buildings, churches and castles.
Can I just ask one last quick question? Just about the bombardment, you're saying that 2.5 metre walls. 2.5 metre walls wouldn't be able to stand up to 17th century or something, the full thing. Obviously, they didn't have big guns with them.
Yeah.
And maybe the territory, I don't know about getting there because it's so water, based and what they wouldn't have been able to. So that whatever guns they had with them probably weren't of the high, big caliber.
The biggest.
Because big siege guns at that stage would have blasted 2.5 metre walls very easily. So obviously, whatever guns, I don't know what guns they had with them, it must have been of a smaller caliber. If they were, if they weren't able to reach it.
That size, anyhow. Yeah.
Poirier, I don't think Poirier's with us, of course, because Poirier is a man
He'd be
who
the
knows
expert.
his artillery. He'd have a, but certainly big siege guns of 17th century would have blasted through that fairly comfortably. So they must have had the big guns with them if they couldn't
The very
make any
biggest,
impression on it. Like, you know what I mean? So I don't know what.
But the whole it wasn't. The big hole wasn't made.
No, absolutely. No, I think that,
Yeah,
obviously they must have had, but, because otherwise, if they'd had the full range of guns, they would have blasted out the water, I'd say, like, you know what I mean? So.
Okay, Con, thank you very much.
Thank you.